Britain's Prime Minister is threatening Israel that if it doesn't watch out, the UK will join France in declaring recognition of a Palestinian state. Are such warnings behind Israel's decision to airdrop aid into Gaza and other measures? Or is the government planning a surprise operation? Why is the UN allowing the contents of hundreds of aid trucks rot in the sun rather than distributing the food to the needy in the Strip? What does the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation have to say about the travesty? We're going to be getting to the bottom of it on today's Israel Undiplomatic. You don't want to miss this.
Shalom, I'm Mark Regev, and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. And of course, as per usual, I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Blum.
Hello, Mark. And as usual, we've got a lot to talk about today, and I'm going to jump right in to ask you, as a former Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom, what you think about the latest last night's, we're now recording on Wednesday, and on Tuesday evening, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, came out with a threat to Israel that if it didn't follow meet certain conditions that he sets out before the UN General Assembly in September, Britain is going to recognize a Palestinian state. And I want to ask you what you would have done if you had been today the ambassador sitting in London.
I would have explained to the British public why this decision is a mistake, why the government says this is going to help peace, why this is not going to help peace. On the contrary, it could do the very opposite, and why the government is simply wrong in its choice here. And the first point I'd make is the Prime Minister here has, as you said, he's threatened Israel. I will do this unless Israel does A, B, and C. He's done no similar threat to the Palestinians. He didn't say, you release the hostages or else. You recognize Israel's right to exist as an independent Jewish state or else. No, he's totally focused his wrath on Israel. If Israel doesn't do, I think, 4 or 5 things, they will do this. And what he's basically done is he's rewarding, as our Prime Minister Netanyahu said in his statement, he's unfortunately rewarding Hamas terrorism. Because he said before, we will recognize a Palestinian state when it's the right time, when it's a good time to do it. Well, after October 7th, that's the good time to do it, to tell the Palestinians, you do the worst massacre against innocent civilians, against the Jewish people, the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. That's the time to recognize a Palestinian state.
By the way, never is a good time for a European country to recognize a Palestinian state. By the way, Israel has tried throughout the years to help to negotiate a Palestinian state, and it never worked. All that did was bring on more intifadas and bloodshed and everything. So he has a lot of nerve. Okay, I know that you're diplomatic, but I'm going to be undiplomatic, and I'm going to say that it's appalling not only that he said that and that he threatened Israel, especially with this explosion of antisemitism that first occurred right after the October 7th massacre. But it's this week has exploded even more surrounding the false claim, the purposeful lie that Israel is intentionally starving the population of Gaza. So we can get to that in a minute about what the reality on the ground is. But that propaganda campaign on Hamas's part, and Hamas, of course, didn't agree to any negotiating points with Israel for the release of even any of the hostages, and that's how the talks all collapsed. And now it's winning a propaganda war thanks to, and it's not only thanks to the likes of Keir Starmer and, of course, French President Emmanuel Macron, who came out and said that he was declaring recognition of a Palestinian state. He already said that. So now we have 2 European allies attacking Israel and also their statements about a lasting peace in Gaza. It's like it beggars belief.
So I would add the following. First of all, the Americans are trying to negotiate some sort of ceasefire in Gaza, which will bring about the release of our hostages. And the administration has put the failure so far to produce a deal, to produce a ceasefire and release of hostages. The administration, the president down, have pointed the finger at Hamas, as have the other intermediaries. The other mediators have done it more discreetly. But Hamas has suddenly hardened its positions. And I think one of the reasons Hamas has hardened its positions is because it thinks it's winning. And Keir Starmer's statement, as Macron's statement before, if the Palestinians think there's only pressure on Israel, and that pressure on Israel is only going to get stronger, why would Hamas ever release a hostage? They can just hang on to their hostages, continue the war, because in the end, the international community will force Israel, in their eyes. I don't think the international community will succeed, and the Americans definitely are not there. But if they think more and more countries are going to force Israel just to unilaterally stop the war, Hamas doesn't have to release a single hostage. Now, the only way to get a ceasefire is to get a hostage deal, and so Keir Starmer is actually undermining the serious efforts. Now, the UK is irrelevant in these talks, okay? So maybe it's their way of doing a tantrum. We don't count anymore. We're no longer the British Empire. I don't know. But he is, through his actions, undermining the ability. I heard a very noted defense correspondent who said Hamas at the moment is going through a euphoria. They think they're winning. And once again, if they think they're winning, there's never going to be a hostage deal that brings about a ceasefire. Furthermore, and I want the British public to understand this, if you recognize a Palestinian state, which of course is theatrical, there is no Palestinian state, but basically you're going to change your level of representation. You're saying that instead of a Palestinian Authority, there's a Palestinian state. You are upgrading the status of the Palestinian Authority. This is an authority that has refused to condemn October 7th. And we're nearly 2 years from it. They've never condemned October 7th. Never. This is this person, you are upgrading your relationship. If you put conditions on it, if you said to the Palestinians, if you do A, B, and C, right, we will recognize you as a legitimate state. Okay, we can have a discussion about that. Is that the right thing or the wrong thing? But to give the Palestinians this diplomatic gift, nothing in return, it's just throwing away a diplomatic tool. If you would say as part of a deal with Saudi Arabia, do it as part of something else, here you're giving it away for free. And as I heard a correspondent on the BBC say this morning, and as you know, the BBC isn't renowned for being the advocate of Israeli positions, yes? The correspondent of the BBC, Keir Starmer is doing this also for internal political reasons. He had these political votes in Parliament on welfare reform, where the government had to pull back because of a revolt of backbenchers, mainly from the left of the party. And here, by playing the Palestine card, he's trying to reassert his authority, reunite the left behind him in the party. And once again, if a BBC correspondent can say it, so can Mark Regev. He's doing it also for internal political reasons.
Well, okay, so he's catering to the lowest denominator of the British public, and that is outrageous. But then let's talk for a minute about what spurred all this, the lies about Israel purposely starving the Gazans. Now, not only does Israel say it's a lie, but of course Israel's now also caving to that propaganda pressure by now flooding Gaza with more aid, airdropping aid, but not only that, electricity, water, name it, okay? And the idea is because President Trump, who has been saying all along, has been on Israel's side all along, that Hamas is the obstacle and that we've got to end the war. And he said, I know what I would do. What he was hinting at, President Trump, was, at this point, I'd just level the place and that's it, and end the war that way, including if the hostages were killed. He never said that, but that was the implication. And of course, he wouldn't say that because nobody wants the hostages killed, except Hamas, maybe. No, even Hamas doesn't want them because they're Hamas's collateral. Now, President Trump also saw the false photos in the New York Times and other publications, The Guardian, etc., with starving Gazan children that turned out, of course, that they were children suffering from genetic disorders, and their being emaciated had to do with that and not because they were being starved. Nevertheless, President Trump also said, look, I don't like, people are hungry. It's no good. And this brings me to one thing to say, that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation head, who's been giving interviews lately, now he has been, since May, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has been flooding Gaza with food. But he said, look, we can't do it alone. And the UN is blocking us. The UN and Hamas wants that organization out of there. Why? Because the Hamas doesn't want Gazans fed. It wants itself fed. It doesn't want Gazans fed, because it likes having control over the food. And the UN also doesn't want to help the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distribute food, and has left hundreds of trucks on the border food rotting in the hot sun, because it says, no, only we get to distribute the food. It won't help another organization, which means that the UN doesn't care at all whether Gazans are hungry. So let me just lead into this, and then I'm going to ask you. So at first I was annoyed that Prime Minister Netanyahu, instead of standing up to this pressure, he's succumbed to it by saying, fine, more aid, more water, more electricity, anything you want. And I had a suspicion that this meant that behind the scenes, once the hostage talks failed, that he has been with his security cabinet planning something that we don't know. And what do you think about that?
So first of all, I'll address something that you said a moment ago, and that is the issue of the UN aid delivery. Now, for most people on this planet, I'm not saying the people who watch our show, but most people on this planet believe the UN are do-gooders, that the UN is out there in crises, helping people in war zones and other zones, giving them food and medicine and tents, and that the job of the UN are like, they're good Samaritans. And Hamas exploits this because Hamas has taken over the UN situation, the UN structure in Europe, in Gaza. They control through manipulation, through personnel and so forth. They can control the UN structures in Gaza. And this is very telling, because as part of Hamas making more and more demands that make a hostage deal impossible, for the time being at least, is they've said all aid has to be delivered by the UN. And I think that is very, very telling, because one can either presume that Hamas are a bunch of humanitarians who really care about the Gaza population, and we know that's not true. Everything they've done since the war started has shown their total disregard for the well-being of the people of Gaza. So when you say Hamas is demanding that all aid goes through the UN, it's not for humanitarian reasons. It's because they know that way they control the aid. They can steal the aid for their own purposes. They can control how the aid is delivered. And in fact, most people who follow this closely know that Hamas's ability to control the aid deliveries into Gaza is an integral part of their ability to try to keep on to power, because they use the UN aid network as an integral part of their system of control, civilian control in Gaza. You take that away from them, maybe their ability to stay in power becomes very rocky. And that is why they are so upset with the American-Israeli alternative aid system. That's why they've done everything to prevent it from succeeding. That's why they put out all these stories and they shoot and they do all these violent incidences at the aid personnel. And of course, how is that reported? It's Israel shooting. They don't say the whole truth. They don't say the truth at all. They say, why is it Israel has an interest in this system working? Why is there always violence around? Is Israel responsible? It's logically, it can't be Israel, because Israel wants these sites to work. So it's obvious that it's coming from Hamas. It's obviously that Hamas is scared of this alternative system working. And maybe one of the reasons that Keir Starmer and Macron are giving, they don't want to, but in fact, they are giving succor to Hamas.
By the way, I wish you would stop excusing them, all right? Maybe they don't mean to. Maybe they don't want to. Come on, let's call a spade here, Mark. It's enough with constantly saying, well, maybe this and maybe that. It's quite clear repeatedly what's going on here. And the UN is in cahoots with Hamas. By the way, when the UN distributed the food, Hamas didn't even really need to steal it because they're in cahoots. The UN is in cahoots with Hamas. Its employees committed rapes and murders on October 7th. UNRWA, we know that hostages were held in the homes of UNRWA employees, etc. The UN is a corrupt, as Johnny Moore, the head of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, said. He says it outright. I've been trying to talk to the UN. Let's work together to feed the Gazans. No, he said it's a corrupt system because the UN, the whole purpose that what America, Israel, and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation want to do is all they want to do is separate Hamas from the civilian population and feed the civilian population. But why doesn't Hamas want them fed? For the same reason it used them as human shields against Israeli military operations. Hamas wants dead Palestinians to be shown all over the BBC and everything, and it wants starving Palestinians. And the whole purpose of the West should be to separate them and to put pressure on them and to kill. Now, it's true, Israel has basically won most of one of its war goals, and that is to remove Hamas as a military threat. But as long as it has food distribution or prevents Gazans from getting food, it still has political power. And third, it's got hostages. Now, as I say, I'm praying that there's some kind of plan we don't know about, because if our alternative here is to say, you know what? Fine, we don't care about the hostages. You're done, because that's all Hamas has left. We're done. Go ahead, do what you want with the hostages. We won. You're finished. You're dead. Whatever. We're not going to do that. Israelis will never do that. I think, again, President Trump wouldn't have said that either, but I think that's what he meant, that for 20 live hostages, many more soldiers are getting killed, etc., and Gazans too. So the issue here is that we have only that hope. But please do not excuse anybody who helps this effort to vilify Israel that is not purposely starving anybody and is not purposely killing any civilians and never has. And the Israeli media should be ashamed of itself for aiding and abetting that anti-Semitic lie. I think that the Israelis who do that are worse than Keir Starmer and Macron put together, because they are giving legitimacy. They're allowing the enemy to say, you see, even Israelis say that. So I'm just enraged at that.
So I think there are a number of different issues here. Is there hardship in Gaza? Of course there's hardship in Gaza. Gaza's a war zone and people are suffering. Are there people, maybe pockets of people, that are not getting enough food? It's possible. What is the myth? What is the lie? Is that Israel has a deliberate policy of starving the people of Gaza. That's just simply not true, and that's malicious, and that's part of the Hamas UN narrative. Yes, and unfortunately believed. Now, what we had this week, when Israel took decisions to drop aid and send aid in, I see it as a necessary thing in any conflict that you have, in war, and we're now in the middle of war. Sometimes your opponent has a victory and you have to pull back so you can attack him somewhere else, yes? I remember in one of the Lebanon wars, or in more than one, there was an Israeli accident. We hit a UN facility in Kfar Kama or something like that, and we agreed to a ceasefire for a couple of days. In other words, you take a hit and then you move on. And I think on the aid issue, because of Hamas's success in this campaign that Israel is starving the people of Gaza, we took a hit, we've responded, and then we move on. Israel's in a very difficult situation today because everyone was focusing on getting a deal, and it's possible, with the help of Macron and Starmer, Hamas is not going to agree to a deal now. And
we know that Hamas is not
going to agree. No, that's not true, because last week people were more optimistic that there could have been a deal, right? There have been times when the Americans, when Netanyahu has even thought we were close to it. Now, it's still not impossible to get a deal. But in the absence of a deal that frees the hostages and does some sort of temporary ceasefire, in the absence of that, what are Israel's options? And I think the option number one has to be military action, yes, that can change the realities on the ground. And that involves risks. You say risks to the hostages, and I say also too, but possibly, as President Trump indicated, if Hamas leaves Israel no choice, I think we will have to upgrade the military operation.
Well, right. But, there are different ways of upgrading a military operation. One, for example, of course, all Israelis have been praying since October 7th that the ideal would have been some kind of Entebbe-like operation where we rescue all the hostages in a brilliant maneuver. Okay. And that didn't happen. We did have a couple of successful rescues. Okay. So right now we have 20 live hostages and 30 dead ones. Right. And they're Hamas's bargaining chips, etc. Now, obviously, so many Israelis are praying that we actually know where most of the live hostages are, and that maybe we are engaging in some kind of, we're going to pinpoint whose homes they're in and which faction they belong to, because some may be with the Islamic Jihad terrorist group and not Hamas. And also, we also know they're going to pull some stunt by saying, well, we don't know where all of them are, etc. But one of the troubles with the negotiations that went on for weeks is that we were agreeing to a long pause in order to get only 10. Why do I say only? Because, of course, we want to save every life. But then you're putting the rest of them, Hamas just could keep going like that forever. And the other thing is that giving a pause just enables Hamas to regroup and recruit new terrorists. Because yes, however many innocent civilians there are in Gaza, it's not hard for Hamas to keep recruiting 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old, all these guys. They entice them. They've all been raised on a diet of jihad anyway. And they do not want to separate the civilian population from themselves, certainly not with food. So perhaps Israel has figured out a way to pinpoint where these hostages are and make a deal, individual deals with their captors, not with people sitting in Qatar, the Hamas representatives who are living it up in 5-star hotels. And by the way, Qatar is Hamas, and Qatar backs Hamas. And if you want to know, Israeli officials suspect Qatar of being behind the Israel is purposely starving Palestinians propaganda campaign. So we have the additional problem of having the mediators being bad actors. So I really think that the time is coming, and I'm hoping. And again, one reason for my optimism that something is cooking that we don't know about is that Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, who's of one of two politicians that the whole world loves to talk about as the, evil right-wing ministers, Bezalel Smotrich said to his constituents and his party, members of his party, that the reason he is supporting the government's increase in aid and everything that's going on right now is there's something he can't say, but he said, believe me, if I'm not quitting the government over what's going on right now, there's a reason. And I could be wrong, he said, but in the meantime, there's a reason for my optimism. I'm paraphrasing. He didn't use those exact words. So if he said that, I'm trusting that Netanyahu persuaded him that something's going on. And thank God we now have a cabinet that no leaks come out of, and so we don't know.
So actually, it's good the cabinet doesn't leak. It's good
Excellent.
that the serious decisions are taken in quiet and that we will surprise our enemies. We did it with Hezbollah. We did it with the Iranians. Maybe we can do it also to Hamas. And that'd be a good thing. You said in your remarks, and I'm quoting, I wrote it down, only 10 live hostages are in the deal that was talked about, the Witkoff deal. And it's true, there are 20 live hostages and only 10, there's 50 altogether. Unfortunately, 30 are no longer among the living. There are 20 live, and you said only 10 as part of this deal. That's correct, only 10. But I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe that if you say all or nothing, you could well end up with nothing. And if it's possible to get a sizable part, in this case, half of the live hostages out, I think it's worth doing the deal. once again, you say all or nothing, you could well end up with no life, right? I know there are risks involved to our soldiers and so forth, but I say firmly, if it's possible to get a deal, I would have done it, as I believe the Prime Minister would have done it. And the way the Americans who are, unlike the British, the Americans who are party to all the details of these complex negotiations, and they've put the blame on the failure of the talks clearly on the Hamas side, right? And we've seen how the administration has talked, yes, shows that Israel really has gone the extra mile, maybe too much for part of Netanyahu's political base to try to get this deal. But my question now is, and I think it's a difficult question, is in the absence of a deal, what are our options? Obviously, and I think Israel, as I said before, we have to upgrade our military. I don't see another option here. And here I will say the following to the Keir Starmers and the Emmanuel Macrons of the world who are going, no, 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 Israel. You have to remember what you're saying. Because when you say ceasefire, stop the fighting, what you're basically saying is to get a ceasefire, you have to stop fighting and leave Hamas in power in Gaza. That's the bottom line. Now, I know that you, Keir Starmer, in his statement said, and Hamas cannot be part of the future and all this here, but it's nice to say, but if you cease fire against Hamas, Hamas will stay in power in Gaza. That's the simple truth. And if you ignore that reality, that's why I said, and you don't have to agree with me, I said you are giving unintentionally, because I don't believe that's your intention, but in practical fact, you're giving succor to Hamas. You're allowing them to stay in power. In other words, Hamas sees that Israel is winning militarily. Hamas sees that all its friends, all its allies, Hezbollah and the Iranians and Assad in Syria, they've all faced great defeats. Hamas is standing alone and under pressure. Who is relieving the pressure? Therefore, they're not making a deal. Who is relieving the pressure? These European do-gooders, and they may be joined shortly by Canadians and Australians and others. I think that's unfortunately not off the cards. It, in fact, might even be likely. Yes, they'll join this bandwagon. They're saying, no, there's going to be increased pressure on Israel to stop, and Hamas will stay in power. They are giving Hamas the get-out-of-jail-free card.
But it's worse than that, because it's not just they're saying ceasefire. A lot of people are saying that. Israelis are saying whatever. It's become a slogan, but they're saying Palestinian statehood. This isn't just rewarding Hamas. It's rewarding, as you said, the Palestinian Authority that pays, that funds terrorism, etc. Point is, it's worse than that. It's saying you're the good guys in this conflict. Okay, and I'm sorry that you say you don't think they're intending and that they're do-gooders. No, they are not do-gooders. Anybody who not only supports these jihadists in any fashion, equates them with Israel in any fashion, and encourages anti-Semites to spew their vitriol. It isn't just about Israel. It's about Jews. Jews are being killed and beaten up in streets all over Europe, in America. It's come to that point where kids were violently removed from an airplane because they were saying something in Hebrew, and they weren't even Israeli kids. Jews with a kippah, Jews with a Star of David. This isn't just about Gaza. We're talking about encouraging Jew hatred that is exploding all over the globe. And my opinion is the only way we can counter that is not through talking and showing that we're good guys. The only way is for Israel to be strong and victorious. That's our only option left, because we are on the front lines. Forget for a minute about the West, which we are. For the Jewish people, and I don't care how many Jewish liberals don't realize it, that no matter what kind of good Jews they are, the jihadists want to kill them too.
So what we're basically saying is what Netanyahu said in his statement in response to Starmer. Netanyahu said, you'll create a jihadi Palestinian state, which will not only threaten Israel in the end, it'll threaten Britain too. And I think people have to remember this. They have to remember that these people who hate Israel, whether it's Iran or Hezbollah or Hamas, they also hate the West, and they more than hate. They have very, very hostile intentions. I like the German Chancellor, and so far, Germany has not joined this British-French sort of party. Yes, Palestinian party. When we attacked Iran, the German Chancellor said that we are doing the dirty work of the entire West. And so maybe what we're doing in Gaza, it's not pretty, but it's the dirty work for the West. Because if Islamic extremism succeeds in Gaza, it will give energy and impetus to Islamist extremists well beyond Gaza, across the Middle East, and I even say maybe in other places too. It's crucial that Israel win this. And I'd like to say, and we're running out of time, as a final comment, when people say to me, Israel is facing is facing
Isolation,
is facing unprecedented criticism abroad. I'm not denying that Israel's going through a very difficult period in our international relations, in our public relations. But I would say very clearly that if we don't win the war in Gaza, nothing else matters. And just as we're losing soldiers and we've lost hostages and we might lose more hostages, and the society, Israel is, a country that's going through a very difficult time. Part of the difficulties is also on the diplomatic front. But we have to keep our eye on the ball. We have to be willing to pay the price. We have to win this, and we will.
And I will just end on one last note. Again, I want to stress that this isn't just for the West and the rest of the world. It's for the Jewish people. It's Jews. They're going after Jews. I think you cannot forget that for 1 second. And they're going after Christians as well, by the way. Not that anybody notices all the slaughter of Christians and Druze in Syria as well. But my point is that Jews have to wake up to this and stop pretending that this is some kind of political issue.
And we'll continue this discussion next week.
I look forward to it.